Hey guys, tonight we travel to the foggy, cobbled streets of Tudor London, where damp socks, creaky floorboards, and the occasional runaway goose set the mood. You're not in a palace or riding with knights. Nope. You're about to shadow a woman with a needle, a basket of thread, and more gossip than a tavern after dark. Her fingers are calloused, her eyesight is a bit shot, and her livelihood depends on how quickly she can make someone else's sock look like new. You hear the faint patter of drizzle against a sloped wooden roof. A candle flickers against thick glass as smoke curls upward into the midnight haze. A woman sits cross-legged on a stool barely wide enough for a cat, hunched over a stocking that looks more whole than fabric. Her needle moves with a rhythm that's equal parts skill and survival. She doesn't hum, but you can almost hear the beat in the silence. Stitch, stitch, tug, turn, knot. If this helps you drift off, give it a like and maybe subscribe for more sleepy tales. Where are you listening from? Drop your location and local time in the comments. As the lights dim and the world quiets down, let this soft story guide you to rest. You walk up behind her, not too close, don't startle her, and you watch. The sock isn't just a sock. It's part of someone's only good pair, part of someone's dignity. In this time, showing too much ankle might be scandalous, but showing a hole? Unforgivable. Your eyes adjust to the soft candlelight. Her name isn't in the history books, but let's call her Agnes. She smells faintly of wool, beeswax, and something pickled. You lean in, curious about the quiet empire she's built on toes and heels. Agnes has a rhythm to her days. Before dawn, she fetches water. Before breakfast, she's darning. And before lunch, she's already been insulted by a rich lady's maid who thinks silk socks shouldn't be touched by anyone with cracked hands. She works just inside the frame of the world's vision, at the seam between necessity and invisibility. But her trade is indispensable. A well-darned sock could mean the difference between an apprentice getting hired or turned away, between a nobleman impressing at court or slipping in his boots. In Tudor London, everyone wears socks, well, except the occasional barefoot child or drunk, but few can afford new ones. Wool is pricey. Silk is absurd. Even cotton, slowly trickling in from overseas, is and beyond most. So socks live long, long lives, often longer than their owners. Agnes doesn't just mend holes, she rewrites endings. A toe pushed through becomes a tale of misstep. A heel worn thin, the echo of a man who walked too far for love or debt. Each thread she pulls is part of London's overlooked heartbeat. Historians still argue whether darning was
Your eyelids feel heavy already, and you haven't even seen her Marcastall yet. But stay here, just a little longer. Watch the way her fingers cradle the thread. She doesn't rush. No one can rush darning, not if they value their eyesight or sanity. A knock at the door breaks the hush. A boy delivers a pair of gray woolen socks wrapped in butcher paper. They're damp, probably stepped in something that wasn't entirely water. Agnes doesn't flinch. She merely lays them beside her and continues her rhythm. She mutters to herself, not curses, not quite, more like footnotes of frustration. How many times can a man walk through puddles and never notice a leak? She's met the owner before. A banker with shiny shoes and a hole in his left heel the size of a walnut, again. You glance around the room. A cat naps in a basket of offcuts. Thread spools in faded reds and dull yellows are stacked beside a lump of wax she rubs between her fingers now and then. It keeps the thread smooth, less likely to tangle. You didn't know that, did you? There's more science to darning than most give it credit. Fun fact, one popular darning technique involved weaving the patch like a tiny loom, warp and weft, a miniature miracle. And yes, there were invisible darning contests. No, really. If you could mend a sock so well that the Lord's footman couldn't find the repair, you earned a tip, maybe even 2 pence. Wild times. The door creaks open again, this time a neighbor's kid, red-faced and breathing like he outran a goose. Ma says she's got 3 ready for you. Socks, not geese. Agnes nods, unbothered. She doesn't need a signboard. Everyone in the lane knows her. The Thread Witch, some call her. Not unkindly, more like respect wrapped in exaggeration. The woman who made a hole vanish quicker than a priest from a tavern brawl. Outside, the bells of St. Dunstan's toll the hour. Slow, weighty clangs that carry through mist and fog. Time feels different here. Less precise, more like warm porridge, thick and forgetful. You sit back on your imaginary stool and let your mind wander with hers. Her life is small, only if measured in feet. In stories, it's endless. You haven't even seen the stocking she once rescued from a fire with nothing but a teacup and blind luck. But that's a tale for later. For now, just sit in the wool-scented stillness and listen to the sound of quiet industry. Stitch, tug, knot, turn.
The air outside the cottage is damp again, but this time it carries the scent of morning. Coal smoke, warm bread, and something faintly sour that might be cabbage, or might be someone's idea of a bath. You step lightly as Agnes does, skirting puddles that glisten like discarded coins in the half-light. It's early, even the birds sound groggy. The few people on the street walk with the stubborn determination of those who know their shoes will never be fully dry. You follow Agnes past a row of crooked houses, their timbers bowed like old knees. A cart rumbles by, wheels groaning under crates of onions. One falls off. No one notices. The onion rolls to the gutter like a rejected actor. Agnes barely flinches. Her mind is already on the day ahead. You know the path by now, through a narrow cut between a butcher's shop and a house that seems held up solely by the will of its chimney. You duck beneath a faded banner fluttering weakly in the wind. It once advertised someone's cheese, but now mostly advertises mildew. This is the alley where she grew up, mud-slicked, rat-prone, and smelling strongly of yeast and sweat. Her earliest memory, she once said, was not of a parent or a prayer, but of watching her aunt thread a needle under moonlight. Quieter then, she muttered, before everything got loud. She was raised among rags, hand-me-downs, tear-me-aparts, and sew-me-agains. Every tunic was a puzzle, every hole a lesson. Her aunt taught her the rhythms, but her hands taught her patience. That's where the story begins. A child with a bent needle and a stubborn streak. Historians still argue whether poor Tudor girls had formal access to trade training or merely absorbed what they saw. In Agnes's case, there were no guilds, no apprenticeships, just laundry, second chances, and threads so thin you could see shame through it. By age 8, she was fixing socks for a shilling. By age 10, she'd patched a noblewoman's silk stocking so precisely, the lady paid her in leftover gooseberries and an offhand insult. "Keep your hands clean, girl," she'd said, as if that were an option. Your feet squelch as you follow her into a market square. The mud here is livelier, decorated with prints from every shoe, hoof, and paw that's passed through. Agnes pauses by a bucket to rinse her hands. Not that it helps much. The water's been reused too many times. It smells like regret. She sets up a small crate and flips it into a stool. A scrap of cloth becomes her table, her toolkit. A worn wooden egg for shaping heels, a half-dozen thread spools, and a tin box filled with buttons and pins that look like they've survived a siege. A woman approaches, thin, pinched, smells like lavender and disappointment. Agnes doesn't blink.
Her world narrows to the weave, to a tiny universe where the only crime is crooked stitching. This morning, someone throws a cabbage, not at Agnes, at a nearby fishmonger. Still, the cabbage lands near enough to be an emotional disruption. Agnes calmly nudges it aside with the toe of her boot. "Why not sell new ones?" a passerby asks her, gesturing at her small basket of ragged socks. "Wouldn't that be easier?" She doesn't answer. She just smiles, the slow kind that carries centuries of invisible labor. And then she lifts the stocking up to the light, revealing a patch that looks like it grew there naturally, seamless, silent, defiant. There's something radical about fixing things in a world that wants to discard them. You realize this now. In a society where value shrinks with each hole, she insists on mending, on saying, "This still matters," even if it's just for feet. You help her organize the pile. One sock smells of smoke, another of elderberry jam. She raises an eyebrow at the jam but shrugs. Life sticks. Did you know? In Tudor England, even the poorest might own only one or two pairs of socks, often passed down like heirlooms. Some would stitch initials into them, others would perfume them with herbs or orange peels. And a few, the especially vain, would dye their socks odd colors to stand out. Agnes once fixed a pair dyed with crushed beetles. "Beautiful," she said. Smelled awful. You ask her about her first customer. She chuckles and says, "My brother tore his sock trying to run from a goat." Not a metaphor, an actual goat. Long story, the goat won. A bell chimes. Not church, not school. This one's softer. Market hour. Time for deals, small lies, and the ritual of pretending to haggle over things everyone knows the price of. Agnes doesn't shout. She doesn't wave. Her silence sells better than noise. Her regulars appear like clockwork. The apprentice with the twisted gait, the widow with her sour cherry perfume, the constable who insists his feet are dainty. They are not. You begin to see the pattern. This isn't just a career, it's a quiet community. A network built one thread at a time. Agnes doesn't just darn socks. She keeps people walking, marching, trudging, dancing. She's part of the city's pulse, even if the city forgets her name. By midday, the square smells like stewed onions, horse sweat, and optimism. At least the kind of optimism you can buy with pickled eggs and a penny. You shift your weight on the stool beside Agnes as she threads her next needle. This one's finer, meant for silk, not wool. And she handles it with the gentle care of someone touching a royal secret. The sock on her lap gleams faintly, pale green, and clearly expensive. Silk stockings were once worn only by the highest of the high, royals, lords, the my lord's cousin's wife's chambermaid type important. Now they've trickled down to the sort of merchant who likes to appear richer than he is. Agnes knows the type. She's patched dozens of such socks, each one more concerned with appearances than comfort. But here's a fun bit. In Tudor society, socks weren't just socks. They were social signifiers. Wool was common, thick, sturdy, and blessedly warm. Linen was for warmer months, if you were lucky. Silk, though? Silk whispered things. Silk said, "I have leisure." It said, "I don't walk much, but I do judge others who do." Agnes chuckles softly, nudging you with her elbow. "Look at this heel," she murmurs. "He wore them dancing, I'll wager. Probably tried to impress some court girl with bad ankles and worse taste." She begins to stitch, the needle slipping in and out like a quiet breath. Historians still argue whether silk stocking use outside of the court was widespread or just fashion fantasy. The records are vague. What we do know is that showing fine socks was considered very intentional. Men especially would pose with a bent knee, 1 foot forward, like they were perpetually auditioning to be knighted by their own wardrobe. Agnes doesn't judge. Much. Okay, she judges a little. But not with cruelty. She just finds it amusing that something so small and squishy could carry such weight in a society obsessed with surfaces. You glance around. A boy nearby tries to trade his cap for a tart. No deal. A woman haggles fiercely over a bolt of dyed ribbon, though you're fairly sure it's already fraying. Everyone's trying to level up, however slightly. And sometimes, a repaired sock is the closest they'll get to elegance. Back to the sock. This particular silk piece has a name embroidered inside. Edmund, it says. Agnes snorts. Edmunds always have holes, she mutters, mostly to herself. She flips the stocking over and begins the delicate lattice work of the patch. The work is almost artistic, like weaving clouds. Her fingers flick and pause, flick and pause. You swear the stocking sighs in relief. When she's finished, the patch blends perfectly with the old silk, though a tiny swirl, her signature, remains at the edge of the heel. Subtle, subversive, like a secret foot tattoo. Nearby, a cart stumbles to a halt. A chicken escapes. Not a metaphor. You've become part of the rhythm now. A man approaches, well-dressed, slick-haired, and clearly new to this whole marketplace thing. His shoes are too clean. His gloves don't bend right. He holds a stocking between two fingers, like it might bite. "Can this be saved?" he asks, voice polite but brittle. Agnes takes the stocking without answering. It's torn, yes, but not hopeless. She gives you a look that says, "New money," and you both know she's right. As she begins to mend, she tells you how darning gained popularity not just from necessity, but from a growing pride in craftsmanship. Good stitching said something about the wearer's care, even when money was tight. Some noble families even had in-house darners, like Agnes, but with more candles and less honesty. Did you know that in some households it was customary to present repaired clothing to guests as a mark of hospitality? "We're not wasteful," it said. "We're responsible. Also, sorry if the cuffs are uneven." Agnes doesn't just fix socks. She preserves dignity, one thread at a time. You peer into her basket. Nestled among the usual cotton blends and wool lumps is something strange, lace. Delicate, whispery, and definitely not used for walking. "Wedding stocking," she says with a smile. Bride tripped walking out of the chapel. Her new husband never let her live it down. You both share a sleepy laugh. Across the square, a baker drops a tray of rolls. A street dog takes immediate advantage. The world keeps rolling, limping, bursting at the seams. Agnes continues to stitch it back together. Her stitches are stories. You begin to realize this. Each loop carries the breath of someone trying to hold it together, quite literally. The fabric of society, you think, might just be wool, and the hands of those keeping it intact, chapped, clever, and rarely thanked. A bell rings again. Not for church, not for school. This one is for pie. Meat pie. The smell is distracting. Even the socks seem to pause. Agnes finishes Edmund's silk stocking with a flick and folds it gently, laying it aside with the reverence of a librarian. You lean back on your crate, eyes beginning to blur at the edges. The sky shifts to overcast, a kind of cozy gray that makes you want to nap in a hay cart or under a table. But not yet. There's more to see, more to darn.
Your crate creaks softly as you shift. The bustle of the square carries on, but Agnes is already packing up. Her hands move quickly. Tin, thread, egg, all tucked away in a cloth bag that smells faintly of mothballs and mint leaves. She ties the bag with a tug of her teeth, then stands with the practiced groan of someone who has sat too long on wood and wisdom. You follow as she weaves through the maze of London's back lanes, a silent figure cloaked in soot-colored skirts. Her path is purposeful, not home,
Not yet. You're heading toward a low-ceilinged alley that hums with chatter. The women's work exchange, unofficial and unlicensed, but very much alive. Here, women stitch, women mend. Women hustle like the very breath of the city depends on their calloused fingers. It might. You slip into the crowd with Agnes, your ears flooded with stories half-whispered and fully embellished. A fishwife patches a sleeve while haggling over haddock. A midwife stitches a christening gown between births. A teenage girl sells pocket handkerchiefs with embroidered insults. May your boots always squish. Business is booming. Gossip travels faster than thread, Agnes mutters. She isn't wrong. One woman leans in close. Did you hear about the alderman's son? She hisses, pointing at a particularly lacy sock. Ran off with a puppeteer, left behind only that. The sock in question does admittedly look dramatic. Agnes raises an eyebrow, then starts stitching. Historians still debate whether spaces like this, female-driven, informal, and deeply communal, should count as part of the official Tudor economy. Spoiler, they absolutely should. These were the networks that kept shirts on backs, souls on feet, and stories in circulation. Today, there's talk of a new Tailors Guild regulation, something about thread origin tracking and protecting the trade. In practice, it means more paperwork and fewer scraps falling into unlicensed hands. Agnes sighs. She's dodged these types of rules before. With style. Guilds, in theory, protected quality. In reality, they protected exclusivity. Most wouldn't allow women, unless widowed or inherited. Agnes is both neither and unbothered. She works outside their notice, or sometimes just under it. She's a whisper, not a signature. A younger woman sits beside her, wide-eyed and wearing hope like it's freshly laundered. I want to learn, she says. Agnes doesn't answer with words, just hands her a fraying cuff and a needle, already threaded. The girl bites her lip and begins. It's easy to romanticize this, the communal sewing circle, the laughter, the secrets stitched into seams. But don't forget, these women are exhausted. They work without safety nets, pensions, or
Agnes laughs, and you see her relax, just a little. Here, among her own, she doesn't have to perform competence. It's understood. She can complain about linen bunching and the injustice of sock pricing without someone mansplaining the difference between wool grades. Did you know there was once a brief attempt to tax buttons? Not garments, just buttons. It didn't last, but for about 6 weeks every button was an act of quiet rebellion. Agnes still has a pair of socks, with pearl-like buttons sewn at the ankle. Fashionable nonsense, she says, but they do jingle nicely. She moves on to a particularly tricky job, a sock that looks like it lost a fight with a fireplace and possibly a ferret. As she dabs a bit of vinegar water onto a scorched spot, you ask if she's ever considered becoming a tailor. She looks up, eyebrow raised. And spend all day arguing with men about collars? No thanks. You grin. Tailoring, after all, is a male-dominated world, structured, ranked, competitive. Darning is quieter, humbler, and far less praised. But Agnes prefers it that way. She gets more done when no one's washing. The day deepens. Shadows grow longer. A child starts crying somewhere over by the pickled eel stand. Ellipses a risky snack. The energy in the alley begins to wind down. Threads snipped, stitches tied off. You help fold a few things, careful not to tangle the finer silks. Agnes stands again, joints clicking like a well-used loom. She tips a nod to the younger women. Same time next week, she says. It isn't a question. As you walk back through the street, past the muddy footprints and spent vegetable leaves, you realize something. This isn't just work, it's architecture. Invisible, yes, but essential. These women uphold the city's fabric, both literally and otherwise. You reach her door, marked only by a fading twist of thread hanging like a forgotten blessing. She pauses, looks back. There's honor in patching what others toss, she says. Not glory, not gold, but honor. You nod. Your feet ache just watching her. Your eyes flutter. The candle inside her window flickers, welcoming you into the quiet again. You're home, at least her kind of home. Threadbare, worn, and absolutely stitched together with love. You wake, not with a jolt, but with a gentle sense of having drifted through something ancient and soft. The cottage smells faintly of boiled nettles and beeswax. Agnes is already at her little table working. The light outside is gray, not quite morning, not quite dusk. In this world, the day's edges blur like watercolors left out in the rain. On her lap sits a pair of socks so worn you can see the bones of the story they carry. This one's from a knight, she says, without looking up. Well, a former knight. Now he sells onions. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. He says the socks still remember battle. I say they mostly remember onions. She threads her needle with the fluidity of muscle memory. The thread slips through her fingers like breath. She begins stitching with care, not because the socks are noble, but because they are hers now. For a little while, anyway. The clients vary wildly. Sometimes it's wealthy lords, too proud to let their servants mend things badly. Sometimes it's apprentices who can't afford a second pair. And sometimes it's lice. Agnes lifts a sock and grimaces. This one bites back. She holds it by the toe like it might start arguing. Little visitors, she mutters. She won't say the word, but you see the vinegar bottle already uncorked nearby. Historians still argue whether lice were simply tolerated in Tudor times or actively combated. The answer is likely both. Combing, boiling, and herbal sachets were all tried. So was ignoring them and pretending that scratching one's ankle was just thoughtful reflection. Agnes, of course, has her own solution. Lavender oil and a scalding rinse. If the sock survives, she says, so does the owner. Usually. The client for the bitey sock is a street boy, maybe 12, maybe 20. In this city, poverty ages you oddly. He works for a fishmonger and gets paid in fish heads and exposure, which is apparently not a new problem. Agnes doesn't ask questions. She just mends what she's given. A knock at the door breaks the rhythm. It's the widow from the square again, this time holding a bundle wrapped in clean linen. Her late husband's socks, she explains. Can you make them less sad? She asks, voice barely above a whisper. Agnes nods. She unwraps them gently. The socks are thick, sensible, and patched already in places that tell you he tried to do it himself. Badly. Bless him, Agnes murmurs, running her fingers over the rough stitches. Socks live close to the ground, literally and figuratively. They bear the weight, the cold, the stumbles, and the people who mend them, they know things. Once, Agnes tells you, she stitched a message into a sock's toe. Just 4 words. Don't trust the cook. The woman who commissioned it never explained. Agnes didn't ask. She still wonders if it was romantic intrigue or just bad stew. Did you know?
In some households, socks were passed down like heirlooms. This was your uncle's, someone might say, as if a hole in the heel could carry family honor. In others, socks were burned upon death, too intimate to share, too worn to save. Agnes prefers the former. Let the socks live, she says. As she works, the candlelight flickers, casting soft shadows on the wall. The rhythm of her stitching continues, the faint pull, the whisper of thread against wool, the occasional huff when the needle finds a knot. A cat pads in from somewhere, silent, unimpressed. It circles your feet, inspects a ball of yarn, then curls up like a judgmental croissant. Agnes doesn't react. She likes to supervise, she says. You glance at the pile beside her. It's taller now. Word travels quickly, and Agnes's reputation has grown from that woman with the needle to something closer to footwear whisperer. She's had a request from someone who claims to be distantly related to a duke. Distant, she repeats, drawing the word out like a fraying thread. She still charges everyone the same, based on fabric, not face. A man once tried to woo her with lace trim and a bad poem. She stitched the poem into a sock and gave it back. You dropped this, she told him. He never returned. Outside, a fog is settling in again, curling around chimneys and doorways like a secret. The street lamps, such as they are, flicker on with a soft hiss of oil. Somewhere, a lute plays badly. Again, possibly the same guy. You help fold the widow's socks. They feel lighter now, not new, but loved, fixed. Agnes tucks a sprig of thyme into the wrapping. For luck, she says, or maybe just for the scent. The city rumbles quietly in the background. You hear footsteps, laughter, the creak of a cartwheel. But in here, in this small candlelit room with its endless heap of socks, there is only thread and time.
The room smells like wool, thyme, and warm dust. You sit cross-legged on the floor now, helping Agnes sort the next day's work. A woolen sock flops limply in your lap, as if resigned to its fate. It has holes in both heels, a stretched-out cuff, and something suspiciously sticky near the toe. You hold it up. Don't ask, Agnes says, already threading her needle. She doesn't flinch at the worst of them. Mud, blood, stew, love letters. She's stitched through it all. Her skill isn't just in technique, but in stamina. This is the 6th sock today, and she hasn't even broken stride. Just a sip of weak tea and a muttered, "Well, that's a challenge." And she's back at it. Her clientele comes in all types. A blacksmith whose socks are singed at the toes. A nun with 6 identical pairs, all with precisely the same tear, probably kneeling too long in the garden. A poet whose socks smell like ink and pretension. Agnes takes them all. Socks don't judge, and neither does she. Much. She's had noble clients too, people who don't meet her eyes, who send footmen with coin and instructions but never return the favor of a name. They wear their stockings high and their noses higher, but still they come back. Tonight's a mixed bag. Literally. A small sack filled with garments of uncertain origin sits beside her. It came with a note. Fix what you can, burn what you can't. She snorts. Dramatic. You peek inside. One sock is missing its entire foot section. Another is knitted with a strange silver thread. Agnes holds it up to the candlelight and squints. Merchants are getting fanciful again. She begins working on a pair of thick woolen hose, coarse, scratchy, but reliable. These belong to someone who walks for a living, maybe a messenger, maybe a thief. Either way they run, she murmurs. Historians still debate how widespread the use of patterned socks was in Tudor London. Some say they were symbols of household identity. colors and stripes, marking you as belonging to a specific lord or trade. Others argue it was simply fashion, or even superstition. Agnes doesn't care much either way, but she does roll her eyes at mismatched pairs. I once had a man ask me to undarn his socks, she tells you, eyes gleaming. Said the holes brought him luck. Couldn't dance properly with them fixed. She chuckles. I charged him double. There's another kind of client Agnes speaks of carefully. Those who bring socks with secrets. Not smuggled coins or coded stitches, though that happens.
There were professional sock makers, sure, but darners, especially independent ones like Agnes, were often faster, cheaper, and more discreet. Many had long-term clients who trusted them more than their own families. One man wrote Agnes into his will. He left her his footstool. She still uses it. A distant shout echoes through the street, something about turnips. You ignore it. Agnes doesn't even blink. She's focused on a sock now so delicate the fabric seems to melt under the needle. Silk blend, she mutters. Imported. Italian, maybe. She adjusts her grip, wraps the thread twice around her finger, and leans in close. Her breath slows. The needle dips. This is the moment when everything else fades. You don't hear the street anymore. Don't smell the stew boiling across the hall. It's just the dance of thread and fabric. Soft, steady, mesmerizing. You could watch this forever. But eventually, Agnes sits back, stretches, and lets out a sigh that sounds older than the building. 7 done, she says. 3 to go. The cat twitches in its sleep. A bit of rain taps against the window pane like a hesitant guest. You both pause, listening to the hush that falls between raindrops. It's a good night for stories. So Agnes tells one. Once had a pair come in, she begins, stitched with gold thread, real gold, tarnished like old teeth. Owner swore they belonged to a pirate turned poet turned preacher. Socks smelled like all 3. She shakes her head. Never figured out which part was true. You laugh. She smiles. People put too much in their shoes, she continues. Dreams, regret, sometimes dried herbs. Had one woman line hers with rose petals every Sunday. Said it made her sins smell sweeter. The sock she's working on now has a history of its own. You recognize it. A familiar patch, a blue thread looped like a lopsided heart. It's from the butcher's boy, the one who hides notes in sleeves. Agnes smooths the fabric, folds it neatly, and places it atop the pile. She stands slowly, joints cracking like old wood. Time for sleep, she says, voice barely above the candle flame. And maybe she means you, too.
You wake, not from sleep exactly, but from a drifting sort of quiet where wool and candlelight blur together in your mind. Agnes is already up, of course. She always is. This morning, she's holding a sock like it insulted her mother. One eyebrow raised, lips pursed. You again, she mutters at the sock, which seems to droop in shame. You move closer. It's a heavy wool number, probably military, black, scratchy, with a heel so thin it might as well be decorative. The toe is doing its best impression of a yawning mouth. Agnes taps it. 3 times this week, she sighs. Either this man walks like a goat, or he's fighting his socks in his sleep. She begins the ritual again. Thread, needle, wax, sigh. It's rhythmic, like a slow percussion beneath the day. and somehow always meditative. "This is the part where I go deaf," she says, half joking. "You ever notice how darning makes the world quieter?" You nod, and suddenly you do. The needle pulling through fabric becomes louder than the birds outside. The gentle rasp of thread against wool is its own lullaby. Today she's feeling generous, or talkative, maybe. She begins teaching you. "Start at the heel," she says. "That's where they always fail first." You hold the sock as she guides your hand, showing you the trick of the wrist, the hidden tension in the thread, the way to anchor a stitch without pulling it too tight. If it puckers, it pinches, and if it pinches, they'll blame the darner. There's pride in the work. Not loud, not boastful, just the kind of quiet satisfaction you get from doing something with your hands that most people will never notice, unless it's done badly. Historians still debate whether darning was considered a respected skill, or just something women were expected to know by default. The truth is probably tangled up in both threads. What is clear, Agnes has turned it into an art, and art, no matter how hidden, leaves a mark. A knock at the door interrupts the lesson. A young woman enters, flushed and out of breath. She's holding a bundle under her arm, like it's a loaf of bread she's terrified of crushing. "Please," she says, almost in a whisper. "They're my husband's. He's off to sea soon." Agnes nods. She doesn't ask questions. She just takes the bundle, unwraps the socks, and examines them like a fortune teller with cards. They're thick, salt-stained already. One has a tear that runs like lightning from ankle to arch. The other is simply thin, tired really, tired fabric. "He's walked far," Agnes says. The girl nods. You watch as Agnes...
When the socks are done, Agnes tucks something into the toe. A coin. "For luck," she says, handing them back. "You'll never notice. But that's the point." The girl leaves quietly. Once the door clicks shut, Agnes returns to the basket. "People bring me their fears," she says. "They just happen to be foot-shaped." You look at the pile. Some are clean, some are questionable. A few smell like they came directly from the inside of a boot that lost a bet. Agnes shrugs. That's part of the job, too. One sock is made of linen. An unusual choice. Delicate. Pale blue with tiny flowers embroidered around the ankle. "Wedding gift," Agnes explains. "Didn't fit. Too tight around the calf. She cried." You trace one of the flowers with your finger. It's stitched beautifully, and yet it's a sock. You feel the absurdity and the sincerity at once. Agnes watches you. "That one I didn't fix," she says. "Just listen." Did you know? Some households had specific sock days. One day a month to sit and mend all the family's footwear. Children would gather around with pins and scraps competing to make the neatest patch. Some turned it into a game. Others turned it into punishment. Agnes says her family just called it Tuesday. She hands you another sock to try. You thread the needle slowly this time, not because you're hesitant, but because you're starting to understand. Darning is an act of care, of staying, of saying, this thing deserves to continue. Your first few stitches are crooked. Agnes doesn't correct you. She just hands you more thread. Every bad stitch, she says, is just a future you being smarter. She chuckles. Unless it unravels in the street, then it's a life lesson. The rain outside begins again. Soft, persistent. You can hear it tapping against the glass in the rooftop in gentle rhythm, matching the pace of the needle. A perfect soundscape for a life stitched quietly in the shadows. And still, she works. Outside, the rain thickens, softening the city into puddles and blurred outlines. You and Agnes stay in, the fire low, the kettle mumbling in the corner. The room feels warmer than it has any right to. And on the table, sprawled out like a well-fed cat, lies the next sock.
A cheerful striped one, faded red and mustard yellow. Agnes picks it up with a smile. Ah, the jester's sock. She flips it over, revealing a patch shaped like a star. He paid me in riddles and spoiled pears. Said he performed for King Henry's cousin's cousin, once removed and never invited again. You laugh. So does she. It's a gentle kind of memory. But just as quickly, the smile dims. She sets the sock down and reaches for another. A dull, gray one, coarser in weave. She sighs. This one's taxed. You blink. A taxed sock? Oh yes, she says, rubbing her temples. Thread taxes. Cloth duties. Stamp duties on imported wool. The king wants everyone to look sharp and pay for the privilege. And she's not exaggerating. In Tudor London, laws around fabric were more than just annoying. They were elaborate performances of power. Certain colors were reserved for certain classes. Deep purple, nobility only. Crimson? Careful now. And if your socks were made of foreign thread, you might be fined, or worse, shamed at church. Historians still argue whether these textile laws were ever strictly enforced, or simply served as moral guidelines dressed in velvet. What's clear is that tailors and weavers had to get creative. And street-level folks like Agnes, even more so. Had a man fined for selling mismatched stockings last winter, she tells you. They said he was undermining national pride. It was wool, 2 different shades of beige. She picks up a spool of thread and squints at it like it owes her money. This one's from Spain, technically illegal without a seal. But it doesn't fray like English thread, so she shrugs. You ask if that worries her. She grins. Wool doesn't report you. People do. Still, she's careful. No flashy colors unless requested. No surplus silk. And always, always keep the receipts. Well, not on paper. Her memory is sharper than any quill. She can recall exactly who gave her which spool, and when, and for how much, even if the customer forgot their own name. She begins work on the gray sock, using muted green thread. Not a perfect match, but close enough. She'll blend it in with little flicks. 1, 2, 3, until it looks intentional. It's a skill born not just from talent, but from years of avoiding trouble by making imperfection look fashionable. At one point, the thread snaps. She tuts under her breath. That's royal thread for you, thin and dramatic. She replaces it with a sturdier piece. Give me peasant wool any day. At least it doesn't lie. There's something oddly satisfying about watching her maneuver through bureaucracy with nothing but a needle and sheer stubbornness. Did you know? Some tailors would hide cheaper threads inside more expensive fabric layers to dodge fees. It was a kind of sartorial smuggling. Ethical gray area, brilliant in practice. Agnes once received a sock with a lining made of unraveled curtain fringe. Flammable, she had declared, but stylish. And then there are the monopolies. Oh, don't get me started on monopolies, she groans, rubbing her eyes. The crown gave the right to dye indigo to one man. One, and he lived in Sussex. Imagine needing blue and having to write a letter for permission. She rummages through a tin and pulls out a spool of forbidden blue thread. It glimmers in the candlelight like a secret. Don't tell the guilds, she whispers theatrically. You ask why people even bother with the rules. Because they fear being seen more than being uncomfortable, she replies, not unkindly. That too is part of her job, restoring not just cloth, but appearances. A lord's sock can't show patchwork, even if the rest of his life is patched together with debts and bluff. A widow's wool must look fresh, even if it's 30 winters old. Agnes isn't just a darner. She's a thread diplomat, a fabric negotiator. She picks up the next sock, brown, dull, torn to threads at the ankle. She sniffs it once. Coal worker, she says, or someone who pretends to be one. You raise an eyebrow. She nods. Real coal workers don't use mint oil to cover the scent. She starts darning again. You hand her the next thread without needing to be asked. This, you realize, is her quiet rebellion, her careful refusal. She stitches back what the system wears thin. The fire crackles, and outside the window, the fog has grown thick again. It hugs the buildings and windows like cotton wadding. You feel the thread slipping between your own fingers now, itching to try again. Agnes smiles without looking up. Go on, she says. Your stitches are getting straighter. And you realize she means more than just your sewing.
The fog hasn't lifted. Not really. It's become part of the city now, curling between door frames, settling into the folds of cloaks, even slipping under thresholds like a bored ghost. Agnes doesn't mind. Fog, she says, is good for business. People stay in. Socks wear out. Fingers itch to feel something warm. This morning, a man arrives at the door. Middle-aged, nervous. He's carrying a single stocking, carefully wrapped in cloth as if it were a relic. Agnes opens the bundle and raises an eyebrow. The sock is ambitious, bright purple, slashed with yellow, embroidered with what appears to be a griffin, and, most importantly, missing the entire heel. Agnes holds it up. It droops dramatically. This sock has seen things, she murmurs. The man shifts uncomfortably. It belonged to my uncle, he explains. He wore it to certain gatherings. He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't need to. The sock does all the talking. Agnes smooths it flat, running her fingers gently over the griffin's wing. You want it fixed? He nods. Matching thread? Not exactly. Just don't let it look mended. He says the word like it's contagious. And here we come to a strange truth about Tudor London. Some people would rather a sock disintegrate than appear patched. Status, Agnes says once the man leaves. People will eat stale bread for a week to afford a tailor, but ask them to wear a visibly darned sock and they'll faint like it's the plague. She turns to you. So today, you're learning invisible darning. Your eyes widen. You've heard of this. It's the dark art, the sock sorcery, the nobleman's dream, and the commoner's fantasy. She teaches you gently, patiently. You match the thread not just by color, but by sheen. You align each stitch exactly with the weave, like sneaking secrets into fabric. It's slow, it's maddening, it's glorious. Historians still argue whether invisible darning began as a court trend or a lower-class survival tactic. What's certain is that by the 1500s, it was already a highly respected craft, especially among those who couldn't afford a new pair of hose every season. Agnes pauses to tell you about a man she once met who had a dozen pairs of socks, but only ever wore the same two. He said they'd been blessed by a friar in Bristol. I think he just liked how they fit. You ask how she charges for invisible darning. She chuckles. Double. Always. If they want a miracle, they'll pay for the sermon. You return to the griffin sock. Stitch by stitch, it begins to breathe again. The heel reforms, like watching something regrow. It doesn't look new. It looks proud, quietly restored. And now for a story. Once, Agnes begins, a merchant came to me with socks he claimed had been cursed. Said every time he wore them, he lost money. His ships sank.
Sometimes, thread is therapy.
Did you know? Some cultures believe socks carried energy, good and bad. In the German states, it was bad luck to wear new socks to a wedding. In parts of northern England, socks were burned to banish fever. In London, well, socks were usually too precious to burn. Agnes reaches for another, a tiny sock, child's size, worn through at the toe. She hesitates a moment longer than usual. You ask who it's for. No name, she says, dropped off last week with a shilling and a note. Please fix for when she's better. She doesn't say more. The stitches are smaller now, softer. You watch her hands move with reverence. A knock interrupts the quiet. This time it's a man with a red face and a loud voice. I demand to know why this patch is visible, he blusters, waving a sock like it's a legal document. Agnes smiles, slow and polite. Because the hole was as big as your ego, she says sweetly. You choke on your tea. The man leaves, spluttering. Agnes turns back to her work. Some socks don't want to be invisible, she says. They want to wear their scars. You help her fold the griffin sock. The embroidery still shines. The stitches are silent. But the story? It's loud in your hands. Outside, the fog begins to thin. A cart rolls by. Somewhere a bell rings, not for church or death, just the hour changing its close. You look at the pile, still many to go, but something inside you has shifted. You don't see holes anymore. You see entry points, and maybe, just maybe, socks aren't the only things worth mending.
The afternoon light has that particular slant, long, golden, and reluctant. It slinks in through the cottage window like it wasn't invited, touching the floorboards, warming the skeins of thread, and casting shadows shaped like spools and hands. Agnes stands, stretches, and groans like the house itself. She's holding a pair of stockings, black and finely knit. These are not street socks. They belong to someone with coin. The material is thin, the toes tapered. The damage? A small, precise tear right along the seam. Fancy folk walk like their feet are borrowed, she mutters, inspecting the rip. One wrong twist and the whole sock gives up. You sit beside her again, eyeing the stocking. There's something oddly familiar about it. Agnes notices. Court laundry, she says, confirming your suspicion. Belongs to someone who knows someone who carries someone else's train. She doesn't name names. That would be impolite. But the court's laundry system is a whole kingdom in itself, fussy, layered, and overflowing with protocol. And beneath all that powdered elegance, feet that sweat, shoes that rub, stockings that split open like gossip. Historians still debate how clean the Tudor court actually was. The record suggests elaborate bathing rituals, but eyewitness accounts often describe courtly funk with alarming detail. Agnes? She knows the truth. They smell like everyone else, she says flatly, threading her needle. The tear is small, but the stakes are high. If her patch is visible, a lady's maid could lose her position. If it's perfect, it disappears into the swirling hierarchy of silk and lace. You watch her begin the mend, her lips moving silently, counting stitches, or maybe reciting the names of people who've tried to cheat her. Once patched a stocking for a baroness, she says. She said it was urgent. For a portrait, Agnes smirks. If you look closely, there's a little bump in the heel. My bump. You lean in, captivated. Darning, it turns out, leaves fingerprints. Another time, she tells you, a palace cook came by in a panic. His best socks, she explains. Had a thing with a scullery maid. She found out he'd been two-timing her with a pastry girl and cut a triangle out of the heel. Petty. Surgical. Agnes stitched it up before the roast was even plated. There's something wonderfully subversive about this work. Beneath the elegance of velvet gowns and gilded boots lies Agnes, mending the truth back together. She hands you a pair now, slightly damp, slightly floral. Gentle, she warns. It's cambric. You begin to stitch, slowly, cautiously. The thread behaves like it's judging you. Agnes chuckles. You're holding it like it's going to bite. Relax. Let the fabric do half the work. You ask if she's ever worked, if just handed her a silk bag with a single sock and a coin that gleamed far too brightly. The sock was fine, of course. Beautiful. Soft enough to fold in half with a sigh. The tear? Invisible. Barely a thread out of place. But they knew, Agnes says. They always know. She mended it anyway. Not for the coin, but for the thrill. For the quiet proof that her work could slip into palaces unnoticed and carry her legacy beneath marble arches and velvet thrones. Did you know? Some of Queen Elizabeth I's personal laundresses were dismissed for returning her garments with creased folds. Creased. Now imagine sending back a sock with a poorly placed patch. Agnes doesn't risk it. Her stitches are practically prayers. The one she's working on now has a crest woven near the cuff. Something you recognize from a church wall or a coin. She doesn't say whose it is. She doesn't need to. Instead, she tells you about the time a noblewoman returned a sock because the thread was too cheerful. It had been dyed with marigold. Made her feel mocked, Agnes recalls, deadpan, by the sock. So she redid it. In beige. Sometimes, the job isn't about repair. It's about appeasement, about making people feel like nothing ever broke to begin with. She finishes the black stocking and folds it neatly, sliding it into a separate cloth bag. Courier's coming tonight, she explains. Needs to go before morning prayers. You help her seal the bag with wax and a pressed button. The candlelight dances across her face, and you catch a flicker of something beneath her usual calm. Not pride exactly, something gentler, something like a sigh, folded inward. Outside, the fog has cleared slightly. The rooftops are visible again, the chimneys puffing like lazy teapots. You realize the city is changing again, its pulse shifting with every shoe that slips on a freshly patched heel. And you're part of that now. It's after dark now, and the city hums in that strange low murmur it keeps just for nighttime, part lullaby, part warning. Horses clop past slowly. Somewhere, a dog howls once and then stops. The candle burns low on Agnes's table, guttering every time the wind tries to sneak through the shutters. You're still here. So is she. And a sock hangs by the hearth like it's hoping for a miracle. This one smells damp. Not the pleasant kind of damp, like rain on stone, but the sour, lingering kind. It squelched a little when she picked it up, and you haven't asked questions since. Laundry day gone wrong, Agnes says, sniffing it with the bravery of a soldier. Or possibly stepped directly into someone's regrettable lunch. She doesn't flinch. She's seen worse. Once had a pair come in after a cow stepped on them, while still occupied. You don't forget that smell. You both laugh. The kind of laugh that only comes when something is absolutely awful, but survivable. She hangs the sock up by the fire to dry, right next to two others that look only marginally less tragic. The air in the room warms, and the scent of wool, vinegar, and roasted onion fills your nose. Someone's cooking across the hall. Badly. You look around at the socks now swaying gently by the hearth, like little flags of surrender. There's a rhythm to it, Agnes says. In the summer it's grass stains, in the autumn it's mud, in the winter, she pauses, nodding at the steaming sock, it's this. She pulls another from her basket. It's stiff, folded in on itself like a sea creature. You try to flatten it. It resists. You have to coax them, she says, especially when they've been abandoned. And there it is, that other part of the job, the emotional labor. Most of these socks come in alone, forgotten in the corner of a drawer, found at the bottom of a market cart, dropped behind a boot bench. Agnes is their last chance. Historians still argue whether wool or linen held up better in the London climate. Wool was warmer, yes, but it absorbed moisture like a bitter memory. Linen was lighter, more breathable, but wore out faster. Either way, both ended up in Agnes's hands eventually. She begins the next repair. This one has a story. You can feel it. There's a way a sock tears, she explains, that tells you how someone lives. She points at a frayed heel. Long walks, no shoes. A torn cuff? Pulled up too often, nerves. A burned toe? Cooking barefoot. This sock is nearly in tatters, but it's been washed. Poorly, but with care. It smells faintly of mint and coal smoke. A woman's likely. Agnes hums softly as she works. Met her once, she says. Didn't have much, but she always smiled like she'd invented joy. She doesn't say what happened to her. You don't ask. The sock, once sad, is slowly transforming. The patch is a soft green, faded. Did you know in some London households, especially among the working poor, there was a tradition of keeping one pair of socks for best, worn only on Sundays or holidays? Agnes says she once repaired a pair 17 times. They were more patched than sock by the end, she laughs, but they still felt special. She finishes the mint-scented one and sets it gently aside. Then she pauses, lifts a brown pair, small, coarse, and already mended in 3 places. These belong to my brother, she says quietly.
You wait. He used to wear them to market, even when they were falling apart. Said the holes helped him feel the road. She chuckles, but the sound is thinner now. He never wanted me to fix them. You glance down. They're still torn, still frayed at the edges. She hasn't mended them. Not yet. Some things, it seems, are meant to be left as they are. The fire crackles again. A log shifts, sending up a small burst of sparks. Agnes doesn't look away from the socks. I dream about stitches, she says after a while. Not the threads, the gaps. The part where something used to be whole. Outside, a cart rolls past, its wheels squeaking like an old song. A cat yowls. The street returns to stillness. Agnes threads her needle again. You ask if it's tiring, always fixing, never finishing. She nods slowly. But there's comfort in the work, even if it unravels again. She lifts the final sock of the evening. Red, frilled, clearly festive. This one's just for fun, she says, and smiles. Even feet deserve a little flair. You laugh, and so does she. By now, the candle has nearly melted to a stub. Its flicker dances across the walls like a story told only in shadows. You sit near the hearth, legs stretched, eyes heavy, but you don't leave. Not yet. Agnes is mid-stitch again, one knee tucked beneath her, focused on the latest sock like it's a letter from an old friend. This pair is unusually fine. Not silk, not wool, something in between. Agnes runs her fingers over the fabric, nodding to herself. Bit of Flemish lace mixed into the cuff, she says. Show-off sock. The pattern along the top is subtle but intricate. Tiny birds, so delicately woven they almost disappear into the fold. The heel, however, is mangled. Not torn exactly, chewed. Literally. You look at her. Dog, she confirms. Or a very determined rabbit. She sighs and places it on her wooden egg to stretch it out for repair. That's the problem with beauty, she muses. It attracts teeth. She begins to mend. The story behind the sock arrives as the stitches do. Apparently, the sock's owner is a musician. Oboe, she thinks. Maybe recorder. One of those instruments that sounds like regret and goose calls. He brought the socks in with a bag of turnips and a smile like he'd written a poem about his own ankles. Agnes doesn't dislike him. He said the birds on the cuff were his dreams, she adds, threading carefully. But he wears them while gardening. Dreams and dirt don't mix. You glance into the basket of finished socks beside her. They're folded neatly, stacked like gentle paragraphs. No two alike. Some are patched brightly, some subtly. All are evidence of quiet triumphs. She once told you that socks are conversations. You're beginning to hear them now. See this loop, she says, pointing with her needle. Someone did this before me. Old stitch. Maybe a sister. Maybe a servant. She leaves it intact. Some work deserves to stay. Did you know, in certain parts of the city, it was tradition to embroider initials into socks, not just for ownership, but as a kind of subtle message. Lovers exchanged them. Spouses trekked for new stitches after long absences. One lord allegedly found a note stitched into his sock. Your brother was here. Family drama, heel first. Agnes works in silence for a time, lips pursed in concentration. When she finally knots the last thread and smooths the bird-patterned cuff, she seems satisfied. There, she whispers. Flight restored. She folds the socks, slips them into a cloth pouch scented with dried orange peel and cloves, and sets them aside. A sharp rap at the door makes you both jump. Agnes frowns, wipes her hands, and cracks the door open. A girl stands there, no older than 13. The toes curl inward as if trying to hide their shame. Agnes lifts them gently, holds them up to the light, and then to a cheek. Cold, she mutters. Poor things. She invites the girl to sit by the fire. You offer her your stool. She takes it wordlessly, hugging her knees. Agnes chooses a soft, sturdy thread, earth brown, warm, and humble. You assist, handing her the wooden egg, holding one sock while she reinforces the weave from the inside out. She's had these for years, Agnes says softly. You can tell by the stretch. They've grown with her. The girl finally speaks. They were my mom's. You glance at Agnes. She only nods, lips pressed. Some jobs don't ask for invisibility. They ask for memory. Agnes stitches slowly, leaving a small curl of red thread along the ankle. Not flashy, not neat, but unmistakably present. A flourish of love. When she hands the finished socks back to the girl, they're still old, still worn, but no longer falling apart. The girl clutches them. Thank you. Agnes waves her off with mock impatience. Wear them. Don't thank them. As the girl disappears into the fog, Agnes stares at the fire for a long moment. Her voice is quiet when she speaks again. Some mending can't be seen. Doesn't mean it's not there. You nod. There's nothing else to say. She reaches for another sock, but her hands pause. Enough for tonight, she decides. They'll keep till morning. The socks in the basket seem to sigh in agreement. Outside, the fog returns. Or maybe it never left. The city softens once more, like a tired sigh beneath a woolen blanket. And inside this little cottage, the woman holds it all together, finally lets her hands rest.
The cottage sleeps, but Agnes does not. You find her standing by the window, a spool of thread in one hand, the other tracing the fog on the glass like it's a memory. The moon hangs low, diffused in the mist, painting everything in soft pewter. A perfect night for stillness. Or for finishing one last sock. She returns to her table and picks up a pair that's unlike the others. Thick wool, greenish-gray, and stained with what looks suspiciously like ink and wine. Priest, she says, likes his sermon strong and his wine stronger. The tear? Right under the arch. Classic stumble. She gets to work. Her motion slower now, not from age, but from something deeper. This is her quiet time. No clients, no noise, just the gentle ticking of a wall clock, the hiss of a dying fire, and the whisper of needle through wool. You sit nearby, not speaking. You've learned that silence here is not empty. It's filled with ghosts, echoes, and the scent of old thread. Agnes looks up at you. You know, she says, once I patched a pair of socks so well, the man came back a week later to propose. You blink. I said no, she adds with a grin. I liked the socks, didn't like the man. Another story. One woman brought me a sock that belonged to her father. Said it still smelled like his pipe smoke. She didn't want it fixed, just reinforced. Said the hole made her sad, but she wasn't ready to see it go. Agnes kept the patch invisible. Some grief, she says, likes to live quietly. Historians still argue whether women like Agnes would have considered themselves artisans, laborers, or simply women doing what they had to do. Truth is, Agnes exists in the cracks between those labels. She's part tailor, part therapist, part archaeologist of the everyday. Did you know? There's a legend, no one knows if it's true, that Queen Elizabeth herself once kept a pair of patched stockings hidden in a drawer. Sentimental, they said. Superstition, said others. Agnes just smiles at the story. I bet she liked the feel of them. The priest's sock is finished. She knots the thread and snips it clean. Another small victory. She sets it aside and stretches, her back popping like an old book binding. She glances at the pile of mended socks, her quiet archive. No names, no grand triumphs, just small, sturdy acts of repair. Some days, she says, this is the only thing I finish. You ask if that bothers her. No, she says. It's the finishing that lets me begin again. She pulls a small wooden box from beneath the table. Inside, bits of thread too short to use, buttons without pairs.
fabric scraps the size of fingernails. The remnant, then a bit of lace from a wedding stocking. Then a button shaped like a heart. She places the heart button gently in your palm. "Keep it," she says. "You've earned it." You realize now that this isn't just about socks. It never was. It's about preservation, about dignity, about people trying, quietly, stubbornly, to hold on to the things that carry them. The fire is nearly out. A single log crackles softly, the embers glowing like coals at the bottom of a kettle. Agnes sits back, folds her hands, and lets out a long, full exhale. "No more tonight," she says. "Even the thread needs sleep." You help her tidy. The basket is lighter. The air smells of wool and comfort. Outside, the city exhales too. And for a moment, everything is stitched back together. The next morning arrives with a hush. No birds, no carts, just the sound of soft rain and socks gently steaming by the hearth. Agnes stirs from her chair, rubbing a stiff shoulder. She slept sitting up again, a woolen shawl draped over her like a forgotten curtain. You stretch as well. Your back aches from the bench. But somehow, you don't mind. Something about the space, the quiet labor, the warm clutter of buttons and thread has softened even your bones. Today, the city holds its breath. From outside comes the faintest bell, long, low, and slow. You recognize it, the plague bell. Agnes does not flinch. She moves to the window and draws back the curtain. Down the lane, a red mark is being painted on someone's door. A bundle of herbs tied with black ribbon is left at the threshold. No one speaks. "They say it's back," she murmurs. You wait. "I've seen 3 of those marks this week," she adds, her voice even. "Maybe more." She turns away and begins boiling water. Stronger now, mixed with vinegar and thyme. The air sharpens. She opens the chest under her table and pulls out a second basket, smaller, tightly sealed. Socks she hasn't touched yet. Socks from people she no longer sees. She sorts them wordlessly. Some are damp, some dry. All are from hands that knocked softly. Hands that left payment, and names wrapped in handkerchiefs. Some of the names are smudged. A few are missing altogether. You help her prepare. The plague means changes. No more casual drop-ins. No more crowded exchange stalls. The market will thin. The gossip will go quiet. But the socks will keep coming. Somehow. She pulls back the rug near the hearth, revealing a hidden cellar door. With a glance, she lifts it and disappears down the steps. You follow. The cellar is dark, but not musty. It's carefully tended. Lined with cedar and waxed cloth. A place for storage, and now, survival. "This is where I wait," she says, voice soft but sure, when the air turns sour. She's done it before. Historians still argue whether plague preparation in London was more superstition than science. Smudge sticks, vinegar rags, lemon peels hung on windows. None of it stopped the disease, but it gave people a sense of control. Agnes believes in thread more than lemons. She's already setting up a second workstation down here. Low stool, needle kit, a tiny oil lamp. Just enough light to mend, not enough to see the fear. You don't ask how long she's stayed down here before. You suspect it's been weeks, months. She survived, after all. She shows you a box marked with a red ribbon. Urgent repairs, she explains. Widowers, midwives, the grave digger. You look inside. Every sock is labeled with initials. The patches are already half done. Sometimes it helps them go on, she says. Sometimes it helps them say goodbye. One sock catches your eye. It's small, child-sized, pinked with embroidery around the ankle. She sees you looking and gently closes. Back upstairs, the fire has burned low. The outside world feels far away. Agnes opens the windows just a crack. The rain falls harder now. It drums on the roof, muffled and constant, like heartbeats behind a wall. You make nettle tea, not for the taste, but for the warmth. She drinks it slowly, hands wrapped around the cup. "I don't fear the plague," she says. "I fear the forgetting." You wait. That people will leave.
and the things they wore will vanish. That no one will remember who walked in these socks, who danced, who waited, who prayed. You look at the basket beside her, 100 stories, folded quietly, mended by hands that will never meet the feet again. Did you know, during the worst outbreaks, people sometimes burned all their clothes, even shoes, even stockings, believing the fabric held the sickness? Agnes flinches at the thought. Socks don't spread plague, she mutters, but grief? That travels. She moves to the work table again, pulls a pair of rough linen socks from a sealed pouch. Someone left these at the door 2 nights ago with a coin and no name. One heel is scorched, the other torn. She begins to stitch, slower than usual. The needle moves like it's remembering. You know, she says quietly, I've mended socks from people I never saw twice, but I remember every one. Outside, the plague bell tolls again. Inside, her stitches continue, steady, silent, and defiant. The air that evening is heavier, not just with weather, but with a hush that settles into the wood grain of the cottage, into the folds of fabric, into your shoulders. You sit at the table while Agnes threads her needle once more, her movements slower than usual. She doesn't say it, but you feel it. Today's socks are different. She picks up a pair that looks like it was never meant for walking. Delicate, lacy, dyed in a soft shade of gray-blue. The toe is frayed, but the damage is not what holds her gaze. These were worn to a funeral, she says, more to herself than to you. The fabric holds the memory gently, creases that remember kneeling, a heel worn from long standing. She mends them not to restore, but to preserve. The patch she selects is nearly invisible, a whisper of thread that seems to know how to grieve. You both work in near silence, your own needle tracing a rougher wool sock with clumsy but improving precision. The motion is comforting now, familiar. Stitch, pull, breathe. Then, laughter. A knock at the door, and it opens without ceremony. It's 3 women, wrapped in shawls and mischief, each holding a bundle of tattered hosiery. Agnes rolls her eyes fondly. You're late, she says. We brought turnips, one replies, and stories. The turnips are, as promised, slightly damp and of dubious size. They clatter onto the table between thimbles and scissors like startled hedgehogs. Feast time, one of them announces, unwrapping a handful of salted fish and a heel of bread. Socks can wait an hour. Feet will still be cold tomorrow. You smile. So does Agnes. The Darners' Feast, they call it. Not an official holiday, but one these women observe whenever life gets too heavy and thread too thin. The rules are simple. Sit, eat, swap stories, and mend, only if you must. One woman, May, pulls out a sock that has clearly survived something traumatic. Probably a fall, definitely a bad decision. I slipped on the soap bucket, she explains, dramatically lifting her leg. Right down the stairs. I blame my husband. Your husband died in 1591, Agnes says dryly, and he still leaves soap buckets in my way, May replies. The room fills with quiet laughter. Historians don't argue about the Darners' Feast because history doesn't remember it. But you're here now, and it's real. A loaf of bread shared between 3 women who've seen too many souls wear thin and still find a reason to joke about ankles. Someone sings, a soft tune, half lullaby, half tavern refrain. Agnes joins in by tapping a spoon rhythmically on the table. The socks, for once, wait. One woman pulls a bright pink sock from her apron and holds it up. My granddaughter's. She insists on wearing one of each color. The door creaks open again. This time it's the boy from the fishmonger stall, holding a pair of hole-riddled socks and 2 small jars of pickled onions. Agnes eyes the jars. I hope that's payment. He nods and adds, and an apology for the last pair. You dropped them in the river, she reminds him. It was a small river. She accepts the offering. The boy joins the table, sheepish but smiling. You help clear a spot. There's barely room, but no one minds. Someone spills vinegar on the lace. Someone else drops a needle into the turnip basket. The cat meows once and disappears under the bench. The room smells like onions, smoke, and laughter. The socks will wait. Did you know? In some parts of the city, women gathered like this regularly, not just to mend, but trade secrets, barter buttons, and pass on stitches like spells. Not written down, not taught in books, just shared, one evening at a time. You feel part of that now. Later, when the room quiets and the food's nearly gone, Agnes picks up her needle again. Just one more repair. A small sock, brightly dyed, torn at the ankle. She doesn't say whose it is. She just mends.
Morning again, but quieter. Even the rain is taking a break. The streets glisten from the night's storm, but the sky is holding its breath. You step outside the cottage briefly with Agnes to fetch water, the two of you wrapped in wool shawls and steam. Everything smells of wet wood and chimney smoke. The market is sluggish. Stalls open with creaks. Bread loaves appear under cloths. But there's no shouting today. Just the shuffle of tired boots and the murmurs of people who've seen too much plague and not enough sunshine. Back inside, Agnes has new work waiting. You help her unload a canvas sack left on the doorstep. It's full, and not just with socks. Letters, bundles tied with string. Some marked with names, others with no return at all. One includes a drawing, childlike, of two stick figures and what might be a cat or a loaf of bread. Agnes takes them to the table. These, she says softly, are the ones people send when they want to be remembered. Each sock in the bag is accompanied by a note, some scrawled hastily, others written with such care it feels like reading a prayer. They don't just ask for repairs, they offer stories. Please fix these. He wore them the day we met. My daughter danced in these before her fever came. These were my father's. I still wear them when I miss his voice. Agnes sets the letters aside gently, as if handling silk. Then she begins. The first sock is plain, brown, coarse, and worn down to the shape of the wearer's foot. It folds naturally, like it's used to kneeling. She starts with the toe, humming under her breath. You take the next. A child's sock. The heel has come loose, flapping slightly. You patch it in blue, sky blue, because today feels like it needs sky. There's a knock at the door, then nothing. When you open it, a small cloth pouch sits there. Inside, a single white sock and a pressed flower. Agnes sees it, nods, and says only, "I'll keep that one till she comes back." Historians still argue whether textile workers in Tudor times were seen as artists or invisible hands. Most weren't credited. Their work lived anonymously, buried in seams, hidden beneath shoes. But here, now, Agnes proves otherwise. Each sock becomes a page, each stitch a word. And Agnes, she's not just repairing, she's writing. Midday brings a change. A man knocks. He's clearly a traveler. Dusty boots, eyes like someone used to sleeping outside. He holds a sock in one hand and a tightly wrapped handkerchief in the other. "This was my brother's," he says. "He didn't make it home." Agnes takes the sock without asking further. You can see the edge of something embroidered at the cuff. Initials, or maybe a nickname. It's faint, but still there. She nods. When she returns it, the man just nods once, clutches the sock, and leaves. Did you know, in some parts of England, especially during the plagues, families would save one item, just one, to remember someone lost. Often not jewelry, not a book, a scarf, a glove, a sock, something that touched the skin, something that held warmth. Later that afternoon, Agnes takes out her oldest box, one you haven't seen before. It's filled with socks so patched they've become almost abstract. One is mostly thread, another has more colors than scents. These, she says, are the ones that were never picked up. You look closer. Some are child-sized, some are embroidered, monogrammed. Others are barely held together. You ask why she kept them. Because someone loved them enough to send them here, she says. That's enough. She pulls out one, bright red, a faded green cuff, a patch in the shape of a clover. I've stitched this heel 5 times, she says, with a soft smile. Still doesn't sit right, like the foot didn't want to be followed. You help her sort the box. She doesn't call it her unclaimed pile. She calls it the remembered pile. They may not come back, she says, but the sock did, and sometimes that's all we're left with. As the sun drops lower in the sky, she ties each pair with care, adding a note, not a name, just a small detail. Danced in, held on to, loved. You realize then that this isn't a business, it's a living archive. One where every patch is a page, and every sock a story that someone once walked through. And in this tiny house, with the windows fogged, and the kettle hissing, and the thread pulled tight as memory, those stories are safe.
The air tonight is colder. It presses in around the windows, sneaking under doors, curling around ankles like a question no one wants to answer. Agnes layers on another shawl and lights a second candle. Not for the light, it's mostly for company. She pulls her stool closer to the hearth, and with her comes the last bundle of the week. The socks are folded neatly, tied together with twine. The knot is a little too tight, the way someone might tie something they're afraid to untie. Agnes sets it on the table and waits a moment before opening it. These came from a man I never saw, she says quietly. Left them on the sill. Paid in full. Not a note, just a feather. She unties the twine and lifts the first sock. Navy blue, made of fine wool, worn soft at the toes. Not torn, not burned, just tired, like someone who's walked a long, long way. She begins to mend it slowly. Outside, the wind picks up. You can hear shutters rattling 2 houses down. A chimney howls softly, like someone remembering a song. You settle beside her, pulling your own work from the basket. A child's sock, striped in yellow and faded red. The heel's been patched before, twice, maybe more. It reminds you of Agnes, stubborn, practical, still standing. You ask her why she thinks some socks come back again and again, while others never do. She thinks a moment, then says, because some people believe in fixing, and some don't. Not everyone returns for what they leave, but Agnes always keeps the work. She lifts the second sock from the bundle. This one is green, darker than moss, lighter than envy. The toe is frayed almost into fringe. She runs her fingers along the edge. This kind, she says, was likely worn indoors. Soft steps, polished floors. She begins a small, careful patch. Did you know? In certain London households, servants were only allowed to wear specific types of socks. Certain weaves, certain colors. Not just for uniformity, but as an unspoken signal of status. One wrong stripe, and a kitchen maid could be mistaken for someone far above her station. Agnes once patched a pair of forbidden striped stockings. Too fine for a cook, she'd said. But I did it anyway. Let her have her rebellion. You watch her now, patching that same quiet defiance into every stitch. There's a knock. This time, it's an older man. Shoulders hunched not from cold but from living. He offers a small pouch and a glance down the lane. Rain's coming again, he murmurs. Agnes takes the pouch. Inside, a pair of socks knit in heavy brown wool. And something else, a tin whistle. No note? She asks. Agnes adds them to the pile. You notice that she lines up every pair she finishes. Even now, she doesn't stack them carelessly.
They face the same direction. Left sock always on top. She once said the left foot leads us out the door. She begins with the heel, choosing gray thread with just a touch of blue. Memory colored, she calls it. You return to your own sock, hands warmed by the fire, breath slow. Each tug of the thread is like the ticking of a private clock. The world spins. The wind moans. And still, there is mending. Agnes pauses only once more tonight. She reaches for her own pair. Yes, her own. They are older than the rest, faded green with a lace cuff long gone slack. The soles are patched and repatched, but she smiles as she holds them. First pair I ever earned coin for, she says, from a midwife. Paid me in bread and a song. She smooths them flat and begins repairing a small split along the ankle. Not because she'll wear them again, but because they matter. You realize something. Every darner has one pair they never throw away. A symbol, a beginning, a reminder. She finishes with a single stitch in gold thread, barely visible, but there. Her mark. You ask her how many socks she's mended in her life. She laughs. You think I've counted? But then she looks at the fire, tilts her head, and adds, enough to know the shape of someone's sorrow by the way they walk. And somehow, that answer feels perfect.
The world is darker now. Not in a fearful way, just in the way late night settles over things. As if the sky has tucked the city in, gently folding clouds over chimneys and soot-streaked roofs. Inside, Agnes lights the last candle. It sputters for a moment, before blooming into soft amber light, casting everything in gold. The socks on the table glow like quiet trophies. You both sit without speaking. There's nothing left to say, really. Except for one final pair. She reaches beneath the table and pulls out a small wrapped bundle. You recognize the cloth, faded checkered cotton, the kind used for baby swaddles or picnic cloths, depending on how life turned out. She unties the corners. 2 tiny socks fall into her hands, barely the length of her palm, pale blue, unraveling at the cuffs, the fabric worn so thin it's almost translucent. There's no note. They came last year, she says softly, left in a basket, with flowers. She holds one gently like she's afraid it might dissolve. I couldn't fix them then, not ready. Now, she begins. Her needle is almost too large for the task. The stitches are impossibly small, but her hands don't tremble. She reinforces the heel first, then the toe, moving carefully around the soft spot at the arch. Her eyes glisten, but she doesn't blink them away. She finishes the first sock and places it down. Then begins the second. You don't speak. You don't move. The second sock has a tear near the cuff. Agnes uses white thread, plain, undyed, the softest she owns. She works it in, slow as a lullaby. Did you know in Tudor times, infants were sometimes buried with their first socks, as if something worn close to the skin might follow them wherever they were going, as if love, woven tight, could travel. Agnes finishes the last stitch and places the 2 socks side by side. They don't match perfectly anymore. One has a newer cuff, the other a tiny flower she's sewn near the ankle. You ask why. For joy, she says, even if it was brief. She wraps them gently, ties the cloth back up, and places them in her wooden chest. Not the pile for collection, not the pile for display, just her pile. The room is still now. The fire gives one last sigh. She leans back in her chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes on the ceiling as if listening to the timbers speak. You think she might drift off like that. But then, she looks at you. You've learned, she says. You know how to mend. You start to thank her, but she stops you with a look. Don't thank me. Just keep going. And so you do. You fold the last of the clean socks. You stack them in baskets. You write names or guesses, or sometimes just symbols on small bits of parchment and tuck them inside. A star. A leaf. A tiny drawn spoon. Each sock tells a story, an egg. And now, the socks are folded. The thread is wound. The needles placed gently back into their tin. The fire has gone out completely,
and the last candle gives its final flicker before fading into darkness. But you are warm, wrapped in the quiet comfort of wool, wood, and work that mattered. Outside, the city is still. The cobblestones hold puddles like mirrors, reflecting only the moon and the memories of those who walked before. The plague bells have stopped. The shutters no longer creak. Even the cat has found a patch of peace beneath the table. You lie down, not in Agnes's cottage, not exactly, but somewhere just like it. A small space, a safe space, with the scent of old thread and the quiet reassurance that every hole can be mended, eventually. Your eyes are closed now, but in your mind, you can still hear the sound of her needle pulling